During the worst hurricane in decades, a kind-hearted single father opens his door to a rain-drenched stranger seeking refuge. In his modest two-story home, David Thompson shares his emergency supplies and last dry blankets, never asking for more than her first name, Emma. His teenage daughter Grace makes space on their worn couch, sharing stories through the howling night. They weather the storm together, finding unexpected warmth in simple acts of kindness. But as dawn breaks and the winds subside, a fleet of black SUVs descends on their quiet street. The woman they sheltered isn't just another storm refugee, she's Emma Morrison, the famously reclusive tech billionaire. Now standing in his waterlogged living room, she's about to make an offer that could change their lives forever. Yet one question hangs in the air, like the aftermath of thunder. Did she stay because of the storm, or because she found something more valuable than her billions? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. David Thompson stood at his kitchen window, watching dark clouds gather over their coastal neighborhood. The envelope lay on the counter behind him, creased from being opened and folded countless times over the past week. Grace's acceptance letter to St. Margaret's Academy, a dream come true that felt more like a cruel joke. The tuition alone exceeded his annual salary as a high school science teacher. "Dad, the weather service upgraded it to a Category 4, Grace called from the living room, her voice scratchy from the fever she'd been fighting. She'd insisted on helping with storm preparations despite being sick, showing the same determination that had earned her that acceptance letter. How long until it hits? He turned from the window, trying to hide his worry. At 16, Grace was perceptive enough to read the concern in his eyes, just as her mother would have. 6 hours, maybe 7. She coughed, then continued scrolling through weather updates on her old phone with its cracked screen. They're saying it could be the worst since Hurricane Andrew. David crossed to the medicine cabinet, retrieving the thermometer and some ibuprofen. "Let's check your temperature again, sweetheart." The pet name slipped out naturally, though she'd recently claimed to be too old for such endearments. Today, she didn't protest. While waiting for the thermometer to beep, David's eyes drifted to the family photo hanging above the fireplace. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time 5 years ago, just months before the cancer took her. She wore her favorite blue sundress, her arm around a younger Grace at their last beach picnic together. The thermometer beeped, 101.2. Not good, but slightly better than this morning. "Dad, stop staring at Mom's picture and help me move the couch away from the window," Grace said gently. She'd caught him again, lost in memories. "We need to get everything secured before it gets worse." Together, they pushed the furniture toward the center of the room. Their home wasn't much, a modest 2-story with worn carpets and outdated appliances, but it was theirs, even if the mortgage sometimes kept him up at night. The acceptance letter's presence weighed on him as they worked, a reminder of all he couldn't provide. "I got another letter from St. Margaret's today," Grace mentioned casually, too casually, as they taped the windows. "They have a few scholarship spots still open for exceptional candidates." David's hands stilled on the tape. "Grace, I know, Dad. The deadline's too close, and even with a partial scholarship, it's still too much." She smoothed a bubble in the tape with practiced efficiency. "It's fine, really. Washington High has a good science program, too." But it wasn't fine. Washington High had metal detectors at every entrance and overcrowded classrooms. St. Margaret's had a robotics lab and college-level research opportunities. Grace deserved that chance, the chance to pursue her dreams of becoming a biomedical engineer, to honor her mother's memory by following in her scientific footsteps. The wind picked up outside, rattling the newly taped windows. They worked in comfortable silence, moving through their storm preparation checklist, filling water containers, checking batteries, gathering important documents. David added Sarah's photo to the waterproof emergency box, along with Grace's acceptance letter. Some things were too precious to risk. "Remember when Mom used to sing during storms?" Grace asked, zipping up her rain jacket. "She'd make up silly songs about thunder being angels bowling." David smiled, remembering Sarah's off-key renditions, "and you believed her until you were 8. 9, Grace corrected, then sneezed. "I miss her songs during storms." "Me too, sweetheart." David pulled her into a quick hug, feeling her fever through their clothes. "Me too." The sky darkened prematurely, and the first heavy drops began to fall. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, waved from her porch as her son helped her into a waiting car, heading inland to stay with relatives. David had offered to drive Grace to his sister's house in Atlanta, safely away from the hurricane's path, but she'd refused to leave him alone, just like her mother, he muttered, checking their emergency supplies one last time. Flashlights, batteries, non-perishable food, first aid kit, medications. The radio crackled with evacuation orders for areas closer to the coast, but their neighborhood was just far enough inland to shelter in place. A sharp gust rattled the house, and the power flickered once, twice, then steadied. Grace's fever worried him more than the storm. Their insurance had switched with the new school year, and the co-pays had doubled. The bottle of ibuprofen was running low, but he'd chosen to buy extra batteries instead of a refill, betting on the fever breaking soon. "Dad?" Grace's voice carried from upstairs. "I found Mom's old battery-powered lantern in the attic. Still works." The lantern had been Sarah's favorite, decorated with stars she'd painted herself. Another memory, another piece of her they kept close. David climbed the stairs to help Grace down, noticing how she gripped the railing more tightly than usual. "Maybe you should try to rest before it gets worse," he suggested, supporting her elbow. "I'm fine," she insisted, but let him guide her to the couch. "Just a little dizzy." The wind howled louder, and rain began beating against the windows in earnest. Their street had already transformed into a shallow river, fallen leaves swirling in the current. In the distance, thunder rolled like a warning. David checked his phone. Still had service, but for how long? He scrolled through his contacts, thumb hovering over his sister's number. Maybe he should have insisted on evacuating. Maybe he was being foolishly stubborn, trying to protect their home when Grace's health. A pounding at the door cut through his thoughts and the storm's fury. 3 sharp knocks. Desperate and demanding, Grace sat up on the couch, clutching Sarah's lantern. "Dad?" David peered through the peephole into the growing darkness. Through the rain-blurred glass he could make out a figure hunched against the storm, wrapped in what looked like an expensive but thoroughly soaked coat. As he hesitated, thunder cracked overhead, closer now. The figure knocked again, and David Thompson, who had spent 5 years learning to be both mother and father, who had stretched every paycheck to its breaking point, who had held on to this house through countless sacrifices, did what Sarah would have done without a second thought. He opened the door, and the woman practically fell through the doorway as another gust of wind caught her coat. David steadied her with instinctive courtesy, noting how she trembled, from cold or fear or both, he couldn't tell. Water pooled around her expensive boots, and her dark hair clung to her face in wet strands. "Thank you," she managed between chattering teeth. "My car." The road was flooded. She pushed her hair back with a shaking hand, revealing delicate features and dark eyes that darted around the room, taking in her surroundings with an odd intensity. "Dad!" Grace's voice carried from the couch, followed by a muffled cough. The woman startled at the sound, as if just noticing they weren't alone. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I can try another house." "In this weather?" "Don't be ridiculous." David shut the door against the howling wind. "I'm David Thompson. That's my daughter Grace." "Emma," she said simply, then shivered again. Water dripped steadily from her coat onto the hardwood floor. David noticed a flash of gold at her wrist as she hugged herself. An elegant watch that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. It was cracked now, probably damaged in whatever incident had forced her to abandon her car. "Let me get you some dry clothes." He turned to Grace, who was watching their visitor with curious eyes. "Honey, could you share some of your Of course. Grace was already pushing herself up from the couch, Sarah's lantern casting star-shaped shadows on the wall as she moved. I have sweats and a hoodie that should fit. Emma began to protest, but another violent shiver cut her off. She glanced down at her ruined designer outfit and managed a small laugh. Sweats sound wonderful. Actually, thank you. While Grace led their guest upstairs, David quickly mopped up the puddle by the door and gathered some extra blankets from the hall closet. The wind rattled the windows with increasing fury, and the power gave another threatening flicker. Grace returned first, moving slower than usual, her fever clearly taking its toll. "She's changing in my room," she reported, sinking back onto the couch. "Dad, did you see her watch? It's a Patek Philippe. Those cost like—" "Grace," he warned gently, "she's just someone who needs help." I know, but she seems different." Grace pulled her blanket tighter. "Not stuck up different, just careful, like she's trying really hard to be normal." Before David could respond, Emma descended the stairs, transformed in Grace's USC sweatshirt and grey sweatpants. Without her sophisticated outfit, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. The expensive watch was conspicuously absent from her wrist. "The watch was my father's," she said quietly, catching David's glance at her bare wrist. "It stopped working when I was trying to turn my car around. Probably for the best. It would have clashed with this lovely ensemble." Her attempt at lightness fell slightly flat, tinged with what sounded like genuine regret. Thunder cracked overhead, and the house plunged into darkness. Grace's lantern, still glowing with Sarah's painted stars, became their sole source of light. "Perfect timing," David said dryly, retrieving flashlights from the emergency kit. "Hope everyone likes cold sandwiches for dinner. The power usually goes out for at least a day during storms like this." "I can't impose," Emma began. "You're not imposing," Grace interrupted, then sneezed. "Dad always makes too much anyway. He thinks storm preparations mean we need enough food for a small army." Emma's expression softened as she looked at Grace. "You're not feeling well." It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. "Just a fever. Dad's been playing nurse all day. May I?" Emma moved closer, her manner shifting subtly. "I used to work in healthcare before my career change." She pressed a cool hand to Grace's forehead with professional efficiency. "How long has the fever lasted?" 3 days, David answered, surprised by this glimpse of another side to their elegant guest. "It's down to 101.2 now." Emma nodded. "Any chest congestion? Difficulty breathing?" "Some congestion this morning," Grace admitted, "but it's not too bad. I have some experience with respiratory infections." Emma's voice held a note of authority that seemed at odds with her borrowed sweats. "If you have any honey, lemon, and hot water—" "We can heat water on the camping stove," David offered, grateful for her obvious medical knowledge. He'd been worried about Grace's persistent fever, though he'd tried not to show it. Together, they assembled a makeshift tea station on the coffee table. The storm raged outside, but in the gentle glow of Sarah's lantern, a strange sort of comfort settled over the room. Emma showed Grace how to breathe in the steam properly, her instructions clear and confident. "Where did you say you worked before?" David asked, curious about this woman who wore $1,000 watches but knew practical nursing techniques. "He didn't," Emma replied, her focus on Grace's breathing. Something in her tone discouraged further questions, though her manner remained gentle. The next hour passed in a blur of howling wind and quiet conversation. Emma proved to be an excellent listener, drawing Grace out about her interests in science and engineering without revealing much about herself. When Grace mentioned her acceptance to St. Margaret's, Emma's eyes flickered with recognition, but she simply smiled and asked about the school's robotics program. David found himself studying their guest when she wasn't looking. There was something almost practiced about her careful responses, her measured smiles. Yet when she forgot herself, explaining the physics of hurricanes to an fascinated Grace, or laughing at David's admittedly terrible storm jokes, a different person seemed to emerge. "Your watch," Grace said, suddenly fighting sleep. "We should Look for it tomorrow. Maybe it can be fixed. A shadow crossed Emma's face. Some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. But thank you. She adjusted Grace's blanket with surprisingly maternal care. You should rest now. The worst of the storm is still coming. As if in response, the wind surged against the house with renewed violence. In the beam of his flashlight, David caught Emma's slight flinch at the sound. Whatever had happened with her car, whatever had brought her to their door, had clearly shaken her more than she was letting on. "You're safe here," he found himself saying. "We've weathered worse storms than this." Emma met his eyes in the dim light, and for a moment, her careful mask slipped entirely. The gratitude and something else, something deeper, in her gaze, made his heart skip. "Yes," she said softly, looking around their modest living room as if seeing it with new eyes. "I believe I am." The old battery-powered radio crackled between bursts of static, its dim display casting a faint blue glow across the coffee table. David adjusted the antenna, trying to catch more than fragments of the emergency broadcast. Between reports of flooding and evacuation zones, the forecaster's voice painted a grim picture of the hurricane's path. Expected to maintain Category 4 strength as it moves inland. All residents are advised to... Static swallowed the rest. Emma sat cross-legged. On the floor, her borrowed sweatshirt sleeves pushed up as she helped Grace with the puzzle they'd found in the emergency supplies. The teenager's fever had finally dropped below 101, thanks in part to Emma's careful monitoring and home remedies. Now Grace was fighting sleep, determined to finish their picture of a lighthouse standing strong against painted waves. "Kind of ironic," Grace murmured, fitting another piece into place. "Building a lighthouse during a hurricane." "Lighthouses are built to withstand storms," Emma replied, studying the box lid. "The best ones are engineered to channel the wind's force around them, rather than trying to block it entirely. Sometimes yielding is stronger than resisting." David caught the distant look in her eyes as she spoke, wondering what storms she was really talking about. In the hours since her arrival, their mysterious guest had revealed an impressive breadth of knowledge, engineering, medicine, physics, while somehow managing to deflect any personal questions. Thunder rattled the windows, and the house creaked ominously. Grace's hand found Emma's in the darkness, an instinctive gesture that made something twist in David's chest. It had been just the two of them for so long, this small, broken family unit holding together through their own storms. Yet somehow, in the span of a few hours, Emma had slipped into their orbit as naturally as breathing. "We should check the second floor," David said, rising from his chair. That last gust sounded close. "I'll come with you," Emma offered, gently, disentangling her hand from Grace's. "2 flashlights are better than 1. They climbed the stairs in silence, beams of light dancing across family photos that lined the wall. Emma paused at one, illuminating a younger Grace sitting on Sarah's lap at a science fair, both grinning over what appeared to be a homemade volcano. "She has her mother's smile," Emma observed softly. "And her brilliance," David added. Then wondered why he was sharing such personal details with a stranger. Sarah was a research scientist, biomedical engineering. Grace wants to follow in her footsteps. Hence the St. Margaret's application. Emma's voice held understanding rather than pity. "Their science program is exceptional." A particularly violent gust rattled the house, drawing them back to their task. They checked windows and corners, looking for signs of water damage. In Grace's room, Emma paused again, this time by the desk where textbooks and scientific journals were stacked, neatly beside college brochures. "She's extraordinary," Emma said, touching a hand-drawn diagram of cellular structures pinned to the wall. "You've done an amazing job with her." "Some days I wonder." The admission slipped out before David could stop it. "Sarah would have known how to give her every opportunity. Instead, I can barely..." He cut himself off, embarrassed by his sudden vulnerability. Emma turned to face him, her expression serious in the flashlight's glow. "You've given her the most important things: love, stability, the courage to dream big." She gestured around the room, at the wall of academic achievements and the family photos mixed with scientific posters. This is a room full of hope. Before David could respond, a crash from downstairs startled them both. They rushed back to find Grace standing by the front window, Sarah's lantern raised high to illuminate a large branch that had broken through the hastily taped glass. "I'm okay," Grace said quickly, though she was shaking. It came out of nowhere." David and Emma moved as one, he pulling Grace away from the dangerous shards while Emma quickly assessed the damage. Rain was already beginning to spray through the broken pane. "We need to seal this immediately," Emma said, shifting into efficient crisis mode. "Do you have plywood? Tools?" "In the garage," David answered, already moving. "Grace, stay with—" "I know the garage like the back of my hand," Emma interrupted. "Stay with Grace, I'll get what we need." Before he could protest, she had grabbed a flashlight and was heading for the garage door, navigating their home with surprising confidence. Through the broken window, David caught a glimpse of the chaos outside. Trees bending almost double, debris flying past like missiles. "Emma, wait!" He caught up to her at the garage door. "It's not safe to go alone." She turned, and for a moment her careful composure cracked, showing something raw underneath. "I'm stronger than I look, David, and your daughter needs you." Her voice softened. "Trust me." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her. David returned to Grace, who had already started cleaning up the broken glass with shaking hands. "She's different from anyone I've ever met," Grace said thoughtfully, letting her father take over the cleanup. "It's like she's used to being in charge, but she's trying really hard not to be." Minutes later, Emma returned, soaked again but triumphant, with plywood and tools. Together, they sealed the broken window, working in a synchronized harmony that felt almost familiar. When the job was done, Emma insisted on checking Grace's temperature again, then demonstrated breathing exercises to help with the lingering congestion. The radio sputtered back to life, reporting that the eye of the hurricane was still hours away. Emma wrung water from her hair, declining David's offer of another change of clothes. "The sweats are fine," she said, settling back on the floor near Grace. "Though I have to admit, I never thought I'd find myself wearing university merchandise." "Again, did you go to USC?" Grace asked eagerly, seizing on this small personal detail. Emma's face did something complicated in the lantern light. "No, I attended a different school, but that's not an interesting story." She picked up another puzzle piece. "Tell me more about your science fair project instead, the one with the cellular regeneration theory." As Grace launched into an enthusiastic explanation, David watched their guest's subtle deflection with growing curiosity. Everything about Emma was a paradox. Her obvious wealth against her practical knowledge, her natural authority tempered by careful restraint, her genuine warmth wrapped in layers of privacy. The storm howled outside, but in their small circle of lamplight, something new was taking shape. Like the lighthouse in Grace's puzzle, they were weathering this storm together, each bringing their own kind of strength to the foundation. Emma's cracked smartphone lay face down in her coat pocket, silent but weighing on her conscience like a brick. She knew what she'd find if she checked it. Dozens of missed calls from her security team, emergency protocols activated, perhaps even a company-wide crisis response. The thought made her stomach clench. Here, in the warm circle of Sarah's star-painted lantern light, that world felt like a distant dream. Grace's fever had spiked again as midnight approached. The teenager now dozed fitfully on the couch, while David heated more water for tea on the camping stove. Emma pressed a cool cloth to Grace's forehead, remembering other nights spent tending to sick children, not in modest living rooms, but in state-of-the-art pediatric wards she'd helped fund. "You've done this before," David observed quietly, handing her a fresh cup of honey lemon tea. "Cared for sick kids, I mean." Emma measured her response carefully. "Yes, in another life. The one you don't want to talk about." His tone held no judgment, only gentle curiosity. "The one I needed a break from." She helped Grace sit up enough to sip the tea. "Sometimes You have to step away to remember why you started something in the first place. Thunder cracked overhead, and Grace stirred, muttering something about molecular structures in her half-sleep. Emma smoothed the girl's hair back, a gesture so maternal it surprised her. When was the last time she'd allowed herself such simple human contact? In her world of boards and billions, every touch was measured, every interaction calculated. She reminds me of someone, Emma found herself saying. A girl I used to mentor in my foundation's education program. Brilliant, determined. She caught herself, realizing she'd said too much. David's eyebrows lifted slightly. Your foundation, a small non-profit, Emma deflected, though the truth stuck in her throat. The Morrison Foundation was anything but small, with its global reach and billion-dollar endowment. It feels like a lifetime ago. Grace coughed in her sleep, a wet, worrying sound. Emma's medical training kicked in automatically as she helped the girl sit up straighter, checking her breathing with practiced ears. The congestion was getting worse. She needs real medicine, Emma said, her professional concern overwhelming her need for privacy. She reached for her coat, fingers brushing the smartphone. The roads are flooded, David reminded her, misunderstanding her intention. And the pharmacy's closed anyway. We'll just have to manage until morning. Emma's hand withdrew. From the coat, one call, and she could have a medical team here within hours, storm or no storm. One text and Grace could have the best care money could buy. But that would mean exposing her identity, shattering this fragile bubble of normalcy where she was just Emma, a stranger who knew about medicine and lighthouses. The wind howled louder, and something crashed against the side of the house. David jumped up to investigate, leaving Emma alone with Grace. The teenager's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. Mom used to sing when I was sick, Grace murmured. Dad tries sometimes, but he's terrible at it. Emma's heart twisted. Would you like me to try? Grace nodded sleepily. Emma began humming an old lullaby, one her own mother had sung before wealth and responsibility had rewritten their family's story. Grace's breathing gradually steadied, falling into a more peaceful rhythm. David returned to find them like that. Emma singing softly, Grace finally resting comfortably. Something in his expression made Emma's careful walls tremble. The window's holding, he reported, sitting beside them. But the storm's getting worse. As if to confirm his words, the radio crackled with an updated warning. The eye wall is approaching. All residents in affected areas should remain in their safe rooms. Expect catastrophic winds and possible structural damage. Emma's phone suddenly vibrated in her coat pocket, the movement slight, but somehow thunderous in her mind. She could picture the message without looking. Her security team would have tracked her phone's location by now. They'd be mounting a rescue operation, protocols be damned. She had maybe hours before her two worlds collided. Everything okay? David asked, noticing her distraction. Just thinking about my car, she lied, hating herself for it. I should have turned around sooner. Where were you heading? Away, she answered truthfully. There was a board meeting. She stopped, recalibrating. A meeting I couldn't face. Sometimes running away feels like the only option. But you stopped here, he said softly. I saw the lights, Emma admitted. And Grace by the window. You looked so real. The word felt inadequate, but David seemed to understand. Real is all we know how to be, he said with a slight smile. Though I'm sure it's a far cry from what you're used to, if he only knew. Emma thought of her penthouse apartment with its sterile perfection, her office overlooking the city skyline, the endless meetings where everyone wanted something from her. Nothing there felt as real as this moment. Sitting on a worn couch, in borrowed clothes, watching over a sick teenager while hurricane-force winds tried to tear the world apart. Grace stirred again, her fever-bright eyes finding Emma's. Tell me another science story, like the one about cellular regeneration. Emma hesitated. Most of her stories came from cutting-edge research her company funded, work that wasn't public knowledge yet. But looking at Grace's eager face, she couldn't refuse. "Did you know they're developing ways to use quantum computing to model protein folding?" she began, carefully editing out any proprietary details. "It could revolutionize drug development." As she spoke, sharing sanitized versions of her company's innovations, Emma felt the weight of her phone like a ticking clock. Soon the storm would pass. Soon her security team would arrive. Soon this precious bubble of authenticity would burst. But for now, in this moment, she was just Emma, a woman who knew about medicine and science, who could sing lullabies and tell stories, who had found something real in the heart of a hurricane. The truth of who she was beat against her ribs like a caged bird, desperate to be free. Outside, the wind reached a fever pitch, and the house groaned under its assault. Inside, Emma Morrison, billionaire tech CEO, philanthropist, and lonely soul, held a sick teenager's hand and pretended for a few hours more that she could keep this simple kind of happiness. The first hint of dawn crept through the storm clouds, painting the flooding street in shades of grey. The hurricane's eye had passed during the night, leaving behind an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant sound of emergency sirens. Emma stood at the window, watching debris float past in the murky water, while David tried one more time to get a clear signal on the radio. Her phone had gone silent hours ago, battery finally drained. The relief she felt at this small mercy only magnified her guilt. Somewhere out there, people were searching for her, resources being deployed that could help others in genuine danger, all because she'd chosen to hide here, selfishly hoarding these precious hours of normalcy. "The fever's breaking," David announced quietly, coming to stand beside her. Grace had finally fallen into a natural sleep, her breathing easier after a night of careful monitoring. "Whatever you did with that honey-lemon concoction, it worked. An old family recipe," Emma said softly, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. It was actually the result of a research study her company had funded, exploring traditional remedies for modern applications. One of many secrets she'd had to edit around during their long night of conversations. David's hand brushed her shoulder, a gesture of simple gratitude that made her heart ache. "You've been a blessing, Emma. I don't know how we would have managed without..." A low rumble cut through the morning quiet, growing steadily louder. Emma's stomach dropped as she recognized the sound. Multiple heavy engines approaching in formation. Her time was up. "What is that?" David moved closer to the window, squinting through the grey light. "Military?" "No," Emma whispered, watching the first black SUV turn onto their flooded street, followed by 3 more. The vehicles moved with practiced precision, their specialized equipment allowing them to navigate the high water. "That's not the military!" Grace stirred on the couch, roused by the noise. "Dad, what's happening?" The vehicles surrounded the house, their tinted windows reflecting the dawn light like mirrors. Men in tactical gear emerged, moving with professional efficiency as they secured the perimeter. Emma watched David's expression shift from confusion to concern. "Emma?" His voice held a new note of uncertainty. "What's going on?" Before she could answer, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Not desperate like her knock had been the night before, but authoritative, commanding. "Miss Morrison?" A familiar voice called through the door. "Ma'am, we've secured the location. Please confirm your status." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma forced herself to turn and face David, to watch understanding dawn in his eyes as he connected the pieces. Her careful deflections, her extensive knowledge, her expensive watch and clothes. "Morrison," he repeated slowly, "as in Emma Morrison. The Emma Morrison." Grace sat up on the couch, fully awake now. "The tech billionaire? The one who developed the quantum medical imaging system?" Emma's carefully constructed walls crumbled. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you, but last night was the first time in years that someone looked at me and just saw me." Another knock, more insistent. "Ms. Morrison, we need verbal confirmation of your safety." "I'm fine, Marcus," she called back, her voice automatically shifting into what Grace had described as her used-to-being-in-charge tone. Stand down to condition 2 and give me 5 minutes. Yes, ma'am. The response was immediate, professional. David stared at her as if seeing a stranger. In a way, he was. Gone was the vulnerable woman in borrowed sweats who had sung his daughter to sleep. In her place stood Emma Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies, whose net worth could buy their entire neighborhood 1,000 times over. I don't understand, Grace said, breaking the tense silence. Why didn't you just tell us? We would have what? Emma asked gently. Treated me differently. Stopped sharing stories about school and science fairs? Stopped seeing me as someone who could simply help with a fever or board up a window? David's expression softened slightly. We would have at least made you sleep on the good couch. The joke, small as it was, eased some of the tension. Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them back. CEOs didn't cry in strangers' living rooms, no matter how much they wanted to. I ran away from a board meeting, she admitted. They wanted to shut down our pediatric research division. Too costly, not enough immediate return on investment. I just drove. Then the storm hit, and I saw your lights, and Grace reminded me so much of why I started all of this in the first place. Understanding dawned in David's eyes. The foundation you mentioned, your medical knowledge, the Morrison Foundation, funds pediatric research and educational initiatives worldwide, Grace whispered, awe creeping into her voice. Dad, they developed the treatment protocol that helped Mom in her last months. Emma hadn't known this, and the revelation hit her hard. Sarah was in our trial program? David nodded slowly. It gave us 6 more months with her. The doctors said it was experimental, but it made her comfortable enough to, he gestured to the family photos on the wall, to have those last memories. A gentle tap at the door reminded them of the waiting security team. Emma took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. I have to go. There are protocols, responsibilities. Will you come back? Grace asked suddenly. I mean, now that we know who you are, would you want to? The hope in the girl's voice made Emma's carefully constructed professional mask crack. She thought of the acceptance letter to St. Margaret's, of David's quiet sacrifices, of the brilliant mind that saw cellular structures in her fever dreams. Actually, Emma said slowly, an idea forming. I think I might have a proposition for your father. David raised an eyebrow. A proposition? The Morrison Foundation needs a new community outreach director, she said, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. Someone who understands both education and the real challenges families face. Someone genuine, caring, with experience in both. Teaching and... She gestured around the room at the evidence of a life lived with love despite limited means. In making the impossible work. Ms. Morrison, Marcus called through the door, the board is demanding an update. Let them demand, Emma replied, not taking her eyes off David. I'm in the middle of an important recruitment meeting. Grace giggled, then coughed. Does this mean you'll help Dad figure out the St. Margaret's situation too? Grace, David warned, but Emma was already nodding. The foundation has a full scholarship program, she said. Merit-based, no strings attached except the requirement to pursue STEM fields, which, given your cellular regeneration theories, shouldn't be a problem. David looked overwhelmed. I can't accept. You can, Emma interrupted gently, because you're not accepting charity. You're accepting a job offer, and your daughter is accepting the recognition her brilliant mind deserves. The fact that they come together is simply efficient business practice. The first real rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, streaming through the window and illuminating the room. Outside, the waters were already beginning to recede, leaving behind a changed landscape. Inside, Emma Morrison stood in borrowed clothes in a stranger's living room, feeling more like herself than she had in years. The board meeting starts in an hour, she said, straightening her USC sweatshirt with mock dignity. I don't suppose either of you would like to come help me save our pediatric research division. Grace's eyes lit up. Can I bring my cellular regeneration presentation? Absolutely. Emma turned to David. And you? ready to start changing lives on a slightly larger scale? David looked around his modest living room, at the emergency supplies they'd shared, at Sarah's lantern still casting its star-shaped shadows, at his daughter's shining face, and made a decision that would echo through all their lives. Lead the way, Miss Morrison. Emma, she corrected softly. After everything we've weathered together, I think we can stick with Emma. The Morrison Technologies headquarters stood like a gleaming lighthouse above the storm-ravaged city, its backup generators ensuring every floor remained illuminated despite widespread power outages. Emma led David and Grace through the lobby, trying not to smile at their barely concealed awe. The security team flanked them discreetly, while Marcus coordinated building access through his earpiece. Emma's assistant, Janet, met them at the executive elevator, somehow managing to look impeccably pressed despite the early hour and weather crisis. She handed Emma a folder without comment, though her eyebrows rose slightly at the USC sweatshirt and borrowed sweatpants. The board is assembled in the main conference room, Janet reported professionally. Dr. Chen is particularly vocal about your absence during the emergency protocols. I'm sure he is. Emma accepted the folder, which she knew would contain the latest proposal to gut the pediatric research division. Please have someone bring my emergency kit from the office, and find a quiet room for Ms. Thompson to rest. She's recovering from a fever. I'm fine, Grace protested, though her voice was still raspy. I want to see everything. David placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Maybe we should actually... Emma interrupted, an idea forming. Janet, please have someone escort Ms. Thompson to the robotics lab on 12. Dr. Park is usually in early. He can show her the cellular imaging project. Grace's eyes widened. The quantum-enhanced microscopy system? The one that can track individual protein movements in real time? The very same. Emma smiled at David's surprised look. Your daughter's fever dreams about cellular structures were remarkably accurate. I think Dr. Park will be quite interested in her theories. Janet nodded, tapping on her tablet. I'll have Alex from engineering show her around. And for Mr. Thompson will be joining me in the board meeting. Emma's tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. Please have legal send up the standard employment contract and scholarship paperwork. Employment contract? David started to object, but Emma held up a hand. First, let me show you exactly what you'd be part of. She turned to Grace, who was practically vibrating with excitement despite her lingering illness. The robotics lab. As a break room with tea and honey. Make sure to drink something warm. As Grace was led away by a friendly-looking engineer, Emma guided David into her private elevator. The doors closed silently, and they began their ascent to the top floor. This is overwhelming, David admitted, watching the floor numbers climb. I know, Emma's voice softened, but sometimes the biggest changes come when we're least prepared for them. Last night, you took in a stranger during a hurricane. Today, you have the chance to help thousands of families weather their own storms. The elevator opened directly into Emma's office suite, a spacious area with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the storm's aftermath. Water still covered much of the city, but hints of sun broke through the clouds, promising recovery. The Morrison Foundation started after I sold my first company, Emma explained, moving to a wall covered in photos. I was 26, suddenly worth billions, and completely lost about what to do with it all. Then I visited a children's hospital. She pointed to a picture of a much younger version of herself, sitting with a bald child who was grinning despite being connected to various medical machines. This was Katie. She told me all about how she wanted to be a scientist when she grew up, how she was going to cure cancer so no other kids would have to go through chemo. She died 3 months later. David stepped closer to the photo wall, recognizing the same medical equipment that had surrounded Sarah in her final days. The treatment protocol that helped Sarah was inspired by Katie. Emma touched the photo gently. We poured billions into research, into making treatment more effective, more humane. But it's not just about medicine. It's about education. about giving brilliant minds like Grace's the chance to fulfill Katie's dream. A subtle chime announced Janet's arrival with Emma's emergency kit. "The board is getting restless," she reported, "and legal sent up the paperwork you requested." Emma accepted the garment bag and stack of documents. "Give me 10 minutes to change. Mr. Thompson can review these while he waits." Once Emma had disappeared into her private bathroom, David found himself alone with a contract that could change his life. The salary figure made him blink. It was several times what he made as a teacher. The benefits package included full medical coverage, life insurance, and a housing allowance. And attached to it all was a St. Margaret's acceptance letter for Grace, with a full scholarship offer. "It's not charity," Emma's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her transformed, designer suit, subtle makeup, hair perfectly styled. Only the warmth in her eyes remained the same. "The foundation needs someone who understands both sides of the equation, someone who's lived through the struggles our families face, who knows how to stretch resources and keep hope alive." "I'm just a science teacher," David said quietly. "You're a father who's kept his daughter's dreams alive through impossible circumstances. You're an educator who inspires students to reach beyond their limitations. You're someone who opens his door to strangers in a storm." Emma moved to stand beside him at the window. "The foundation doesn't need another corporate executive. It needs someone real." The boardroom doors were visible through the glass walls, and David could see figures in expensive suits moving impatiently inside. "And the board? They'll accept a high school teacher as community outreach director." Emma's smile turned slightly predatory. "They're about to learn some lessons about real-world impact, starting with Grace's presentation on cellular regeneration theory, which I believe—" She checked her phone. "Dr. Park is already raving about in the research chat." David looked at her in surprise. "You knew she'd impress them." "I suspected." Her fever dream theories about protein folding were remarkably similar to our latest research findings. Sometimes the most brilliant insights come from minds unconstrained by traditional thinking. She straightened her jacket. "So, Mr. Thompson, are you ready to help me convince a room full of venture capitalists that investing in children's futures is more valuable than quarterly profits?" David looked down at the contract again, at the opportunity to give Grace everything she deserved, to help other families facing the battles they'd faced with Sarah. He thought of Emma in borrowed sweats, singing his daughter to sleep, proving that sometimes the most important credentials were measured in compassion rather than degrees. "Where do I sign?" Emma's smile softened into something real, something that echoed the connection they'd forged during the storm. "That's just the preliminary paperwork. The real question is, are you ready to weather another storm with me? Because I have a feeling convincing the board to expand the pediatric program rather than cut it might be more challenging than a Category 4 hurricane." Through the windows, sunlight finally broke through fully, illuminating the receding floodwaters. Below, somewhere in the building, Grace was sharing her dreams with scientists who could help make them real. And here, 50 stories above the city, David Thompson, teacher, father, survivor of his own storms, prepared to step into a new chapter. "Bring on the hurricane," he said softly. Emma's hand found his briefly, a touch full of promise and shared purpose. Then she straightened, becoming once again the CEO who commanded billions, but now with a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before the storm. "Let's go change some lives," she said, leading the way toward the boardroom, "starting with yours." The renovation plans for the Thompson house lay spread across Emma's desk, architectural renderings showing a careful balance between improvement and preservation. She'd insisted on maintaining the home's character while updating its infrastructure, a metaphor, perhaps, for all the changes underway in their lives. "The contractor can start next week," she explained to David, who stood examining the plans with a mixture of gratitude and unease. "We'll reinforce the structure, update the electrical system, add a proper home office, and give Grace that science lab she's been dreaming about." "It seems excessive," David said quietly, though his finger traced the outline of what would become Grace's lab space. "The foundation position is already more than generous. It's not excess, it's investment in our community outreach director's ability to work effectively." Emma's tone was professional, but her eyes held warmth. "Besides, after what Grace's protein folding theory did in the board meeting, I'd say she's earned that lab space." They both smiled, remembering how Grace's passionate presentation had silenced the board's objections. Dr. Park had burst into the meeting, practically vibrating with excitement about her insights, and even Dr. Chen had been forced to admit that investing in young minds might be worth the cost. The local newspaper lay on the corner of Emma's desk. Their stories splashed across the front page. "Hurricane brings unexpected blessing to local family." The article was surprisingly tasteful, focusing on the foundation's new community initiatives, rather than the personal details of that stormy night. Still, the attention had been overwhelming. David's return to Washington High to resign his teaching position had caused a sensation. Students crowded the halls, asking if it was true that Grace had solved some big science problem, that she was going to St. Margaret's, that their beloved science teacher was going to work for the famous Emma Morrison. "Mrs. Rodriguez next door brought us a casserole," David mentioned, sitting down across from Emma. "Said she always knew we were special people, but didn't expect this kind of special. Half the neighborhood has stopped by. Are you having any second thoughts?" Emma asked carefully. "About any of it?" David considered the question seriously, as she knew he would. It was one of the things she'd come to appreciate about him during their intensive work together over the past week. His thoughtful approach to everything, whether it was analyzing program proposals or deciding what to keep from their old life. "Grace is thriving," he said finally. "Not just at St. Margaret's, but in the research program. Dr. Park calls me twice a day with updates about her revolutionary thinking. She's finding her place, her purpose. How could I regret that? And you?" Emma pressed gently. "Are you finding your place?" David's eyes met hers, and that same spark of connection they'd felt during the storm flickered between them. "I'm learning to navigate new waters." Speaking of which, the Foundation's Family Support Coordinator sent over some interesting data about medical debt in our target communities. Emma recognized the deflection, but allowed it, turning to the tablet, where he'd pulled up the relevant statistics. They worked together seamlessly now, his practical experience in education and family struggles balancing her corporate expertise and resources. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Grace burst in, still wearing her St. Margaret's uniform, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, Emma, Dr. Park says my theory could lead to a new approach for protein mapping in cancer cells. And Jessica, she's in my advanced biology class. Her little brother is in treatment at Children's Hospital, and when I told her about the Foundation's research program..." Emma watched as David's face softened, seeing his daughter so animated, so full of purpose. Grace had taken to her new environment as if she'd been born to it, her natural brilliance finally finding the resources it deserved. "And Emma, could you come to Family Science Night at St. Margaret's? They want to hear about the Foundation's STEM initiatives, and I kind of already told them you'd be there. Dad's doing a presentation about making science accessible to everyone. And I thought maybe you could talk about the technology side." "Breathe, sweetheart," David reminded her with a laugh. Grace paused, then looked between them with sudden shrewdness. "Did I interrupt something? Were you two having another professional development meeting that's really just an excuse to... How about we look at those protein mapping results?" Emma interrupted smoothly, ignoring David's slight blush. "Dr. Park sent me the preliminary data." As Grace eagerly pulled up her research on the large screen, Emma caught David watching her with a soft expression that made her heart skip. They hadn't talked about the growing something between them, both tacitly agreeing to focus on work and Grace's transition. But moments like this, comfortable, domestic, full of shared purpose, kept adding up. The renovation plans still lay on her desk. showing a home being carefully upgraded while keeping its heart intact. Like their lives now, fundamentally the same, but strengthened, improved, given room to grow. "Oh," Grace exclaimed suddenly. "Mrs. Rodriguez said to remind you about dinner tonight, Dad. She's making her special paella, and Emma, she specifically, said you're expected to come. No excuses about board meetings this time." Emma met David's eyes over their daughter's head. And when had she started thinking of Grace as theirs, seeing her own contentment reflected back? Sometimes the worst. Storms led to the clearest skies. David's first paycheck from the Morrison Foundation felt surreal in his hands. The amount represented more than 2 months of his teaching salary, but it wasn't the money that gave him pause. It was the memo line: Director of Community Outreach and Family Support Services. "Quite a change from Mr. Thompson's science department, isn't it?" Emma's voice came from his office doorway. His office, another surreal concept. The space was warm and inviting, with walls of windows overlooking the city and shelves filled with both scientific texts and family photos. "I keep waiting to wake up," he admitted, setting down the check, "to find myself back in my classroom, with a leaky ceiling and outdated textbooks. Instead, you're revolutionizing how we connect with families in crisis." Emma entered, picking up the proposal he'd been working on. "The board approved your emergency housing initiative, by the way, unanimously." "They did?" David straightened in surprise. "Even Dr. Chen." "Especially Dr. Chen. Your presentation about the correlation between stable housing and medical treatment success rates was rather convincing," she smiled. "Though I suspect his change of heart might have something to do with Grace's latest research breakthrough. He's been practically giddy since her paper was accepted for peer review." David shook his head in amazement. Just 6 weeks after the hurricane, Grace had become something of a celebrity in the research department. Her unconventional approach to protein mapping had opened new avenues for treatment targeting, and her youth and enthusiasm had breathed fresh energy into the entire program. "She called from school earlier," he said. "Wanted to know if she could stay late to work in the engineering lab. Apparently, they're developing some new imaging technique, the quantum resonance project." Emma nodded. "Dr. Park says she's made some fascinating connections between cellular behavior and quantum mechanics. He's talking about co-authoring a paper with her." Pride swelled in David's chest, tempered with a touch of wistfulness. His daughter was soaring beyond his wildest dreams, entering a world of advanced science he could barely comprehend. But when he'd expressed this concern to Grace, she'd looked at him in surprise. "Dad," she'd said, "everything I understand about science came from you. The way you taught me to question, to observe, to never stop being curious, that's what makes all this possible." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Janet appeared with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Thompson, the families from the pilot program have arrived for the orientation. They're gathering in the community room." David stood, straightening his tie. Another adjustment, wearing business attire instead of his casual teaching clothes. But as he gathered his materials, he felt the familiar surge of purpose that had always accompanied facing a classroom of students. "Will you be joining us?" he asked Emma. "Wouldn't miss it." She fell into step beside him as they headed for the elevator. These families deserve to know that the person overseeing their support services understands their struggles firsthand. The community room had been transformed under David's direction, designed to feel welcoming rather than corporate. Comfortable seating arranged in conversation groups, a play area for children, and most importantly, a wall of resource information, presented in clear, accessible language. 20 families waited inside, all facing medical crises, similar to what he and Sarah had experienced. David recognized the look in their eyes. Hope warring with exhaustion, determination battling fear. One mother held a sleeping child in her arms, an IV port visible beneath his sleeve. "Good morning," David began, his teacher's voice naturally filling the space. I'm David Thompson, and like everyone in this room, I know what it's like to face a medical crisis while wondering how to pay the mortgage. He saw tension ease from several shoulders as he continued. 5 years ago, my wife Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. We had a mortgage, a 10th grade daughter, and insurance that covered barely half of what she needed. The Morrison Foundation's experimental treatment program gave us 6 precious months we wouldn't have had otherwise. Emma, standing quietly at the back of the room, watched as David connected with each family, sharing practical information about the Foundation's support services while weaving in his own experiences. This was why she'd chosen him, his ability to bridge the gap between corporate resources and human needs. Your children's medical care is covered, he explained, addressing their most immediate concern. But we know that's only part of the battle. The Foundation's comprehensive support includes housing assistance, educational advocacy, and family counseling services. We're here to help you weather this storm. A father in the front row raised his hand. Mr. Thompson, I heard, is it true that your daughter is now working with the research team, that she's helping develop new treatments? David smiled, thinking of Grace bent over microscopes with Dr. Park, her mind racing ahead to connections others hadn't seen. Yes, because someone gave us help when we needed it most. My daughter is now in a position to help others. That's what the Morrison Foundation is about. Not just treating illness, but nurturing potential. As the orientation continued, Emma watched David in his element, seeing how naturally he'd adapted his teaching skills to this new role. He wasn't just administering programs, he was building a community of support, just as he'd once built a community of learning in his classroom. When the session ended, families lingered to talk with him, sharing their stories, asking questions that went beyond the practical into the emotional territory he navigated so well. Emma saw in their faces the same trust she'd felt during that stormy night, the recognition of someone who truly understood. David's first paycheck might have marked a professional transition, but his real compensation was written in the hope dawning on these families' faces. He was still teaching, still changing lives, just on a scale neither of them had imagined before the hurricane brought them together. The tabloid's headlines screamed across the front page, "Tech Billionaires Hurricane Romance," the real story behind Emma Morrison's charitable choice. Beneath it, a grainy photo showed Emma leaving the Thompsons' newly renovated home, her hand briefly touching David's arm in what the article called an intimate gesture. "They're calling it a calculated PR move," Grace said, her voice tight with anger as she read from her phone during breakfast. Sources close to the Morrison Foundation question the qualification of a high school teacher to manage multi-million-dollar initiatives. "There's more." "That's enough," David said quietly, though Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. As he poured coffee, they were gathered in the Thompsons' new kitchen, morning sun streaming through windows that had weathered their second storm together, this one made of newsprint and speculation. "The board wants to make a statement," Emma said, scrolling through urgent messages from her PR team. "They think we should get ahead of the story." "By saying what?" Grace demanded. "That Dad's not good enough? That helping families like ours is just for show?" "Grace," David warned, but Emma raised a hand. "No, she has a right to be angry." "We all do." Emma set down her phone, choosing her next words carefully. "But we also need to be strategic. The Foundation's work is too important to be undermined by gossip." A new message flashed across her screen. David's former in-laws had been contacted by reporters, eager for their take on their granddaughter's sudden elevation to private school. "Student and research prodigy. Mum's parents," Grace said, reading over Emma's shoulder. Her voice wavered. "They haven't even spoken to us since the funeral. Now they want to comment?" David's face darkened. "I'll call them. They have no right—" "They have every right to be concerned about their granddaughter," a new voice interrupted. All three turned to find Janet in the doorway, tablet in hand. "At least that's how the media will spin it. And Dr. Chen is already fielding calls about Grace's research credentials." My research stands on its own, Grace protested, but Emma could see fear beneath her defiance. At 16, brilliant as she was, Grace was still vulnerable to having her achievements questioned. Yes, it does, Emma said firmly. Which is exactly why Dr. Park is presenting your protein mapping findings at the International Biochemistry Conference next week. She turned to Janet. Schedule a board meeting for this afternoon and get me everything we have on the Foundation's impact metrics since David took over community outreach. Already compiled, Janet replied. Efficient. As ever. The numbers are impressive. Family engagement up 60%, successful program completion increased by 45%, and the Emergency Housing Initiative has been cited as a model program by 3 major healthcare organizations. David absorbed this information with characteristic humility, but Emma saw his shoulders straighten slightly. The families did the hard work. I just helped make the resources more accessible. By completely redesigning our approach to family support, Emma countered. By bringing real-world experience to theoretical programs, She was interrupted by Grace's sharp intake of breath. Dad, look at this. She held up her phone, displaying a social media post from one of her St. Margaret's classmates. Wonder if Grace Thompson got into advanced biochem the same way her dad got his job. Just asking. The hurt in Grace's eyes made Emma's blood boil. But before she could respond, David's phone chimed with an incoming email. His expression shifted as he read it. The school board, he said quietly. They're reviewing my teaching credentials release to St. Margaret's, suggesting there might have been irregularities in my recommendations. That's ridiculous, Emma snapped. Your teaching record is exemplary, but it makes for a good story. Doesn't it? David's voice was tired. The unqualified teacher who caught a billionaire's eye during a hurricane. The teenager whose research breakthroughs might be influenced by her father's relationship with... Stop. Emma's command cut through the kitchen. This stops now. She stood every inch the CEO who commanded a tech empire. Grace, get your things. You're coming to the lab with me. Dr. Park is going to prep you for every possible question about your research, and you're going to show those doubters exactly why you earned your place. But school, I'll handle St. Margaret's. Janet, call Dr. Chen. I want him to personally review Grace's work publicly and critically. When he validates her findings, no one can claim favoritism. David started to object, but Emma pressed on. And you're coming to the board meeting, not to defend yourself, but to present the new data on our program outcomes. Let the numbers speak for themselves. The media, Janet began. The media can wait. Our work is what matters. Emma's voice softened as she looked at her makeshift. A family, battle-weary but unbowed. We weathered a Category 4 hurricane together. We can weather this storm too. Grace managed a small smile. At least this time we have power and clean clothes. And each other, David added quietly, his eyes meeting Emma's with the same trust he'd shown that first night. Emma felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. She'd built her company by innovating, her foundation by seeing potential, where others saw problems. Now, watching Grace gather her research notes while David straightened his tie for battle, she knew this challenge would make them stronger. Let the tabloids talk. They had work to do. The dinner invitation sat on Emma's desk, deceptively simple on Grace's flowery stationery. Family dinner, Saturday at 7. No shop talk, no emergencies, no excuses. Yes, Emma, corporate takeovers count as emergencies. No dad helping someone. Move doesn't count as a prior commitment. Emma smiled, touching the careful handwriting. Grace had left it propped against her computer monitor that morning, along with a sticky note reporting that her protein mapping presentation had received a standing ovation at the biochemistry conference. 3 months had passed since the tabloid. Storm broke, and life had settled into a new rhythm. Dr. Chen's brutal and brutally honest review of Grace's research had silenced most critics. The teenager's passionate defense of her findings, backed by undeniable data, had earned her respect in the scientific community. More importantly, it had restored her confidence. A knock at her office door revealed David, holding an identical invitation. "Our daughter is becoming quite the social coordinator." Our daughter. The phrase still sent warmth through Emma's chest, though neither of them had formally acknowledged how their relationships had evolved. They'd been careful, professional, focused on work and Grace's success. But moments like this, shared smiles over Grace's determination to bring them together, kept breaking through their careful boundaries. "She gets that from her father," Emma said softly. "That ability to bring people together, to create community wherever you go." David leaned against her desk, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his aftershave. "The Foundation's family support network would disagree. They think you're the one with the gift for connection. I just provide resources. You make them matter." She gestured to the latest impact report on her screen. "The new pediatric wing opening next month? That happened because you helped families tell their stories in ways the board couldn't ignore. We make a good team." His voice held a question. Before Emma could respond, Grace burst into the office, practically glowing with excitement. "Doctor, Park wants to expand the research team. He says my approach to quantum imaging could revolutionize how we track treatment responses, and—" She stopped, looking between them with shrewd teenage wisdom. "Did I interrupt another professional consultation?" "We were discussing your dinner invitation," Emma said smoothly, ignoring David's slight blush. "Good, because Mrs. Rodriguez is making her special paella, and she said if either of you tries to work late, she'll personally come to the office and drag you home." Grace's casual use of home, meaning their shared space, their shared lives, hung in the air. How could we refuse an offer like that? David's hand brushed Emma's shoulder. As he straightened, a touch that felt both natural and electric. "Exactly," Grace beamed. "Oh, and Emma, can you help me with my calculus later? Dad tries, but he gets that confused look when I start talking about quantum applications." "I do not get confused," David protested. "I just think traditional mathematical approaches are perfectly valid." "Okay, boomer," Grace teased, dodging her father's playful swat. "I'll see you both at home. No excuses." After she bounced out, the office felt both emptier and fuller, charged with unspoken possibilities. "She's happy," David said quietly. "Despite everything, the media attention, the pressure of her research, the changes in our lives, she's genuinely happy." "Are you?" Emma asked, finally voicing the question that had lingered between them. David turned to her, his expression open and warm. "I think you know the answer to that." The dinner invitation seemed to glow on her desk, promising an evening of family, food, and the simple joy of being together. No titles, no responsibilities, no careful distance, just them, finding their way forward. 7 o'clock, Emma said softly. "I won't be late." David's smile held all the warmth of that first stormy night when he'd opened his door to a stranger. "Neither will I." The letter had yellowed slightly at the edges, Sarah's handwriting still clear and steady, despite being written in her final weeks. "My dearest David, when you find love again, and you will, because your heart is too big to stay closed forever. Please don't let guilt dim its brightness. You deserve joy. Grace deserves to see her father happy. Just promise you'll tell her about the bad jokes I used to make during storms." David sat in his home office, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. He'd found it while organizing. Old papers, tucked inside a folder of Grace's early school reports. The renovation had unearthed so many memories, each one a bittersweet reminder of the life they'd had before. "Dad," Grace's voice was soft from the doorway. "Emma's here. We brought dinner, but are you okay?" He looked up to find both Grace and Emma watching him with concern. Emma held back slightly, respecting the private moment between father and daughter, but her presence felt right somehow. Natural. "I found one of your mum's letters," he explained, holding it out to Grace. She took it carefully, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "Her storm jokes were pretty terrible," Grace said with a watery laugh. "Remember the one about thunder being angels going bowling?" I used to think that was the height of meteorological humor, David smiled, then caught Emma starting to step. Away. Stay, please. Emma hesitated, then entered the office fully. Are you sure? This feels like a family moment. It is, Grace said firmly, shooting her father a meaningful look. That's why you should stay. David stood, moving to the window that overlooked their backyard. The renovation had added a small greenhouse where Grace now conducted preliminary experiments, its glass panels gleaming in the evening light, change and continuity, grief and growth, all existing together. Sarah knew me better than I knew myself sometimes, he said quietly. She wrote this letter, knowing I'd need permission to be happy again, knowing I'd struggle with feeling like I was replacing her. You're not, Grace said, touching the letter gently. Mom knew that too. She knew love doesn't work that way. Emma remained quiet, but David turned to look at her, seeing understanding in her eyes. They'd never discussed her past relationships directly, but he'd glimpsed the shadows there, the wariness that came from having one's heart treated as a corporate asset. I was engaged once, Emma said suddenly, surprising them both. He was on my board of directors. When the merger fell through, so did the engagement. It took me years to realize he'd never seen me as anything but a business opportunity. Grace made a sound of outrage, but David recognized the cost of this confession. Emma Morrison, who guarded her privacy fiercely, sharing her own wounds to help heal theirs. Is that why you ran away during the hurricane? Grace asked softly. Another board meeting, another person seeing you as just a balance sheet? Emma's smile was sad, partly, but then I found something real. A father and daughter who saw me as just Emma, who shared their home and their stories and didn't want anything except to help a stranger in a storm. David crossed to where she stood, taking her hand. The gesture felt both monumental and completely natural. Sarah would have liked you, he said simply. Really? Emma's voice held in vulnerability he rarely heard. Oh, yeah. Grace grinned, holding up her mother's letter. You make terrible storm jokes, too. The tension broke as they all laughed, and David felt something tight in his chest finally release. Sarah's words seemed to hang in the air, blessing this new chapter while honoring what came before. So, Emma said, squeezing his hand, I believe I was promised some of Sarah's famous bad weather humor. Grace's eyes lit up. Well, there was this one about lightning being nature's way of taking flash photography, as his daughter launched into Sarah's repertoire of meteorological puns. David watched Emma's face, bright with genuine joy, no corporate masks in sight. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe love didn't divide or replace. Maybe it just grew, making room for new stories, while treasuring the old ones. Outside, clouds gathered for an evening shower, but inside they were already home. The threatening letter from the board member arrived by courier, marked urgent and confidential. Emma read it twice in her office, her hands steady even as anger coursed through her. The message was clear. Either David Thompson resigned his position voluntarily, or the board would launch a formal investigation into his qualifications and the circumstances of his hiring. They're calling it a conflict of interest, Janet reported, her usual professional calm tinged with disgust. Marcus intercepted 3 calls from tabloids this morning. Someone's leaking details about your private meetings, suggesting impropriety in the Foundation's grant allocations. The programs speak for themselves, Emma said tightly. The numbers are being questioned. They're claiming David manipulated the impact data to justify increased funding for his initiatives. Janet hesitated. And there's more. They're challenging Grace's research credentials. Emma's head snapped up. They wouldn't dare. Dr. Chen received an anonymous email suggesting her breakthrough was actually work stolen from another researcher. They're threatening to go public with the allegations. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about David's position or Emma's personal life. This was a calculated attack on everything they'd built together. Someone wanted control of the Foundation's billions, and they'd found the perfect pressure point. Before Emma could respond, Grace burst into the office, tears streaming down her face. "They're saying I'm a fraud. My whole research team got copied on an email claiming I plagiarized my work. Dr. Park is furious, but some of the other scientists are already backing away from our projects." "Where's your father?" Emma asked, already rising. "In a board subcommittee meeting. They called it." Suddenly said it was mandatory. Grace's eyes widened with understanding. "It's a trap, isn't it? They're trying to force him out." Emma's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus. "Media gathering in lobby. Story breaking about scandal at Morrison Foundation." This was it. The crisis point she'd feared since that first morning after the hurricane, her carefully built world of corporate power colliding with the real, precious life she'd found with the Thompsons. The board had calculated perfectly. Attacking Grace's reputation would pressure David to resign to protect his daughter, and Emma would be forced to choose between her company and her heart. "Janet, get me everything on board member Stephen Mitchell's financial dealings for the past 5 years. He's behind this. That letter has his particular brand of corporate manipulation all over it." "Already working on it," Janet confirmed, fingers flying over her tablet. "And you should know, Dr. Park just called. He's offering to stake his entire reputation on Grace's integrity. Says he'll go public with proof that her theories were developed independently." Grace looked up from her phone, tears replaced by anger. "Dad's not answering my texts. What are they doing to him in that meeting?" Emma thought of David, facing a room of corporate sharks alone, armed only with his integrity and genuine passion for helping others. She thought of that first night during the hurricane, when he'd opened his door to a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. "Janet, call security. No one leaves that boardroom until I get there." Emma's voice held the steel that had built her empire. "Grace, go to Dr. Park. Tell him to prepare a complete timeline of your research with all supporting documentation. I want proof that can't be questioned." "What are you going to do?" Grace asked, recognizing the determination in Emma's stance. "What I should have done months ago." Emma grabbed her coat. "I'm going to show them what happens when you threaten my family." The word hung in the air. Family. No qualifiers or corporate careful language. Grace's smile was fierce through her tears. "Go get them, Mom." The title was spontaneous, unplanned, but it felt as natural as breathing. Emma pulled Grace into a quick hug, then squared her shoulders. She'd built her first company in her 20s, revolutionized medical technology in her 30s, and now, in her 40s, she was about to remind the corporate world why Emma Morrison never lost a fight worth winning. "Time to weather another storm," she said softly, heading for the door. The community petition appeared first on social media, then spread like wildfire. "Stand with the Morrison Foundation Family Support Program." It was started by Mrs. Rodriguez, of all people, and the signatures came flooding in. Families they'd helped, medical staff who'd seen the program's impact, teachers from David's old school. Emma strode into the boardroom just as Stephen Mitchell was reaching his crescendo. "Clearly a liability to this foundation's reputation." He stopped mid-sentence at the sight of her face. "Speaking of liability," Emma's voice could have frozen flame, "Janet just sent me some fascinating documents about your recent stock trades, particularly the short positions you took against our pediatric research division right before launching this little coup attempt." David sat at the far end of the table, his posture straight, despite the tension evident in his shoulders. His eyes met Emma's with absolute trust. "This is precisely the kind of emotional decision-making we're concerned about," Mitchell recovered smoothly. "Your personal involvement with Mr. Thompson has clouded your judgment." "My judgment?" Emma pulled up a holographic display, filling the room with data. "Let's discuss judgment. First, the Foundation's metrics since David Thompson's appointment. Family program retention up 85%. Successful treatment completion increased by 60%. Cost per patient down 40%, while care quality indicators improved across the board. She switched displays. And here's an interesting pattern. Every time we announce a major program success, certain board members make suspicious market moves, almost as if someone was trying to manipulate our stock for personal gain. Mitchell's face reddened. These accusations are fully documented. Janet appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The SEC finds them quite interesting. They're particularly curious about those offshore accounts. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see Grace standing with Dr. Park in the corridor, surrounded by the entire research team. The teenager held her head high as her mentor addressed what appeared to be a hastily gathered press conference. Proud to stake my entire scientific reputation on the originality and brilliance of Grace Thompson's work, Dr. Park was saying, his voice carrying through the glass. Her breakthrough in protein mapping has already saved lives in our pediatric oncology ward. Any suggestion of academic dishonesty is not only false, but malicious. David stood, moving to Emma's side. Our daughter is defending her integrity on national television while you plot corporate takeovers, he said to Mitchell. Which one of us has misplaced priorities? The word daughter rang through the room, claiming both their personal truth and professional alliance. Emma felt strength flow between them, where their shoulders touched. The Foundation's mission is to help families in crisis. Emma addressed the entire board. David Thompson has transformed how we fulfill that mission because he understands both sides of the equation. He's lived it. And Grace, she's revolutionizing our research because she sees possibilities where others see only problems. She smiled coldly at Mitchell. Rather like how I see the possibility of criminal charges in these trading patterns. The door burst open, and Janet entered with her tablet displaying a live social media feed. The petition has over 100,000 signatures. Mrs. Rodriguez is giving interviews about how the Foundation changed her grandson's life. Dr. Chen is trending for his viral post defending Grace's research. Dr. Chen, Mitchell sputtered. He said, and I quote, anyone questioning Grace Thompson's scientific integrity clearly knows nothing about science or integrity. Janet read with satisfaction. Emma looked at the board members, who hadn't yet aligned with Mitchell's faction. So, shall we vote on these ridiculous allegations, or should we discuss the real issue, attempting to manipulate Foundation policy for personal profit? One by one, hands raised in support of ending the investigation. Mitchell slumped in defeat as Janet efficiently documented the vote. Grace is finishing her press statement, David said softly to Emma. Should we go support our daughter? Emma took his hand openly, no longer caring who saw. Actually, I think she's supporting us. Together, they left the boardroom to join Grace, their steps perfectly in sync. Behind them, Janet began distributing SEC contact information to suddenly nervous board members. The storm hadn't fully passed, but they were weathering it together, not just as individuals, but as a family. And this time, they had an army of supporters standing with them. The new family photo sat framed on Emma's desk, taken at the Foundation's community fundraiser. Grace beaming between David and Emma, Dr. Park photobombing in the background with a thumbs up, and Mrs. Rodriguez somehow managing to slip into the frame with a plate of her famous paella. It captured everything they'd become. Professional success intertwined with personal joy, formal boundaries softened by genuine connection. The SEC investigation into Mitchell's trading activities is proceeding, Janet reported, setting down the latest update. He's offered to resign quietly in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Counteroffer, Emma said, not looking up from Grace's latest research proposal. He resigns, makes a public apology for questioning Grace's integrity, and donates a golden parachute to the Pediatric Research Division. Janet's smile was sharp. I'll have legal draft the terms. A knock at the door revealed David, carrying a stack of reports and wearing the slightly harried expression that meant he'd been dealing with overflow requests for the family support program. Since the controversy had gone public, applications had tripled. "We're going to need more staff," he said, settling into what had become his usual spot on her office couch. "Turns out, publicly defending your daughter's honor while exposing corporate corruption makes people trust you with their family crises. Who knew?" "Speaking of our daughter," Emma began, but David was already nodding. "Dr. Park called. They want to fast-track her research for clinical trials. Something about unprecedented results in early testing." Pride bloomed in Emma's chest. After everything, the accusations, the public scrutiny, the attempts to discredit her work, Grace had emerged stronger, more determined. Just yesterday, she'd presented her latest findings to a packed auditorium at St. Margaret's, her former critics now scrambling to claim they'd always supported her work. "We should celebrate," Emma said suddenly. "All of us, the whole extended Foundation family." David's eyes softened. "Mrs. Rodriguez already texted. She's planning a dinner for 30, minimum. Says we need to properly mark the occasion of, and I quote, showing those fancy suits what real family means." Emma looked at the photo again, at the joy radiating from Grace's face, at the way David's hand rested naturally on her shoulder, at the community that had rallied around them and become something more than colleagues. "Well," she said softly, "Mrs. Rodriguez hasn't been wrong yet." David crossed to her desk, touching the frame gently. "No, she hasn't. About any of it." Their eyes met in the reflection of the glass, and Emma saw their next chapter written in his smile. Some storms cleared the air, making space for new growth. "And sometimes the family you built was stronger than any corporate empire." Grace's drawing appeared on Emma's desk one morning. 3 figures rendered in teenage artistic style, standing together in front of a house that was half modest home, half corporate tower. Above them, she'd written simply "My Family" in careful letters. Below, in smaller text, "Sometimes the best things come from storms." Emma was still holding the drawing when David arrived for their daily meeting, his familiar. Footsteps pausing at her office door. "Ah," he said softly, "she left one for me too." "Did yours come with a sticky note saying 'hint, hint'?" Emma asked, managing a watery laugh. "Actually, mine said, 'Dad, sometimes the smartest people need help seeing what's right in front of them.'" David crossed to her desk, his presence as steady and warm as it had been that first night during the hurricane. "Our daughter isn't exactly subtle." "Our daughter," Emma repeated, tasting the truth of it. "When did that happen? When did all of this become so real?" David finished. He touched the drawing gently. "Maybe it was real from the moment you showed up on our doorstep. Maybe some things are just meant to be, even if they arrive disguised as disasters." Emma stood, needing to move, to process the emotions threatening to overflow. "I spent years building walls, protecting myself from people who only saw the CEO, the bank account, the corporate asset. Then you opened your door to a stranger in a storm and somehow you found home?" David's voice was gentle. "I know. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had Grace, my teaching, our little world. I didn't expect a drenched billionaire to complicate everything, to complete everything," he corrected softly. Emma turned to face him, finally letting her careful walls crumble completely. "I love her, you know, Grace. Not just because she's brilliant or because she's your daughter. I love her for herself, for all the ways she's helped me remember who I am beyond the boardroom." "I know," David said, moving closer. "And I love you. Not Emma Morrison, CEO, but just Emma, who knows bad storm jokes and makes tea for sick teenagers, and fights like hell for what matters." The truth hung between them, simple and profound as lightning illuminating the sky. Emma thought of that first night, of borrowed sweats and shared stories, of finding family in the heart of a hurricane. "Well," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "Mrs. Rodriguez will be insufferably pleased with herself." David laughed, the sound warming her heart. "She's already planning the menu for Sunday dinner. Says it's about time we made it official." "Made what official?" "That sometimes," he said softly, finally closing the distance between them. The best foundations are built during storms. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. The house key felt significant in Emma's palm, not just a piece of metal, but a symbol of everything they'd become. David had presented it to her this morning over breakfast, Grace filming the moment on her phone while Mrs. Rodriguez pretended not to cry into her coffee. "You practically live here anyway," Grace had said practically, and the renovation did add that amazing home office. Now, sitting in her corporate office after another successful board meeting, Emma turned the key over in her hands, marveling at how the smallest things could represent the biggest changes. The board had just unanimously approved the expansion of their pediatric research division, with Grace's breakthrough treatment protocol as the flagship project. Dr. Park called, Janet announced, entering with her tablet. Grace's paper was accepted for publication in Nature. "He says she's the youngest first author they've ever featured." "Have we heard from the patent office?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer from Janet's smile. "Approved this morning. The Morrison-Thompson protocol is officially registered." Dr. Park insisted Grace's name be first on the application. The hyphenated name caught Emma's attention, making her finger the key again. Another boundary between personal and professional life dissolving naturally, like water finding its level after a storm. David appeared in the doorway, his face bright with news of his own. "The Family Support Network just got approved for federal funding. We can expand to 3 more states by next quarter." "I heard," Emma smiled, "Senator Phillips called personally to congratulate us. Apparently his granddaughter is one of your success stories." "Our success stories," David corrected, crossing, to drop a kiss on her head. A gesture so natural now, neither of them thought twice about displaying affection at the office. The whole Foundation family made this happen. The Foundation family had indeed grown. What started as a corporate entity had evolved into a true community, with Mrs. Rodriguez somehow becoming their unofficial chief morale officer, hosting weekly dinners where research breakthroughs were celebrated alongside personal milestones. "Speaking of family," David continued, "Grace wants us home early tonight. Says she has a presentation that can't wait." Emma raised an eyebrow. "A scientific presentation?" "Actually," David's eyes twinkled, "I think it's about converting the guest room into a proper bedroom for you. She has a whole PowerPoint prepared on optimal space utilization, complete with quantum physics references. Knowing our daughter? Probably. Our daughter." The words felt as natural as breathing now, as right as the key in her hand. Emma stood, gathering her things with a new sense of purpose. She had another home to go to, another life beyond these corporate walls, not replacing her professional success, but enriching it with meaning and joy. "Janet," she called, "hold my calls until tomorrow. I have an important presentation to attend about bedroom configurations." Janet's deadpan delivery hadn't changed, but her eyes were warm with genuine happiness for her boss. "About the future," Emma replied, taking David's hand. "All of it." The wedding invitation lay on their kitchen counter. Elegant in its simplicity, Emma Morrison and David Thompson request the joy of your presence. Grace had insisted on adding a small lightning bolt design to the corner, a private joke about storms bringing unexpected blessings. 1 year had passed since that hurricane-swept night. The Morrison Foundation's new headquarters now stood proudly in the renovated downtown area, its ground floor dedicated to a community center that was Mrs. Rodriguez's particular pride and joy. The Morrison-Thompson protocol had entered widespread clinical trials, with promising results that brought tears to Grace's eyes whenever new data came in. "Mom!" Grace's voice carried from her lab, the converted garage space where she split her time between homework and revolutionary research. "Can you help me with this quantum calibration? Dad's trying, but he's doing that confused squinting thing again." "I'm not confused," David protested, appearing in the kitchen with an expression that was indeed slightly squinted. "I just think traditional measurement approaches are perfectly valid." Emma and Grace finished in unison, sharing a knowing look. Emma paused at the kitchen window before joining them, taking in the scene that had become her normal. Her home, her family, her life beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. The wooden swing on the porch still held the spot where she'd first sat that stormy night, though now it was cushioned and often occupied by various members of their extended foundation family. A rumble of thunder in the distance made her smile. Another storm approaching, but this time she was already home. "You know," David said softly, coming to stand behind her, "I never properly thanked you for getting lost in that hurricane." "Really?" Emma leaned back against him. "I seem to recall quite a few thank yous, including that rather public one during the board meeting when Mitchell resigned." "That wasn't a thank you, that was a declaration." His arms wrapped around her. "Wait, speaking of which, Mrs. Rodriguez is threatening to cook for 300 at the wedding." "Only 300. She must be feeling modest." Grace's voice interrupted them again. "If you two are done being romantic in the kitchen, this quantum calibration really needs attention." They shared a laugh, the kind of easy joy that came from finding exactly where you belonged. Emma touched the invitation once more before heading to the lab, remembering other papers that had marked their journey: Grace's acceptance letter, David's contract, research publications, and that first tabloid that had tried to tear them apart. "You know what Mom used to say about storms?" Grace asked later, as they worked together over her latest experiment. "That they wash away what's weak to make room for what's strong." David looked up from his community program reports, meeting Emma's eyes across their shared space. "Your mom was a wise woman. She'd be proud of us," Grace said softly. "All of us." Emma watched her family, the one she'd found in a hurricane, built through challenges and chosen with her whole heart, and felt the truth of their journey settle into place. Some storms changed everything, and some changes were exactly what you never knew you needed. Outside, thunder rolled again, but they were already home, already together, already complete.